All right, so we're officially live. So let me jump over to the agenda here. Okay, so it's asking me to kind of give a quick synopsis of what we read, which was basically about the Columbia space shuttle, the incident or the accident, the tragedy of blowing up upon re-entry. Which, side note to that, my dad was on the shuttle program, so that was pretty.
Really?
I remember being pretty traumatic in our household, where my dad was like, "Well, this is the end of the program that I make my living off of." So, yeah, I do remember that time very well. But basically, it was about discovering a whole host of issues along the way that they had continued to minimize over time, which led to catastrophe. So, let me see here. So it basically asks us to start out by saying, what do we think some of the issues were, and why do we think they were important as to what led to the catastrophe?
I think my analysis of really kind of what was at the root cause of it, I mean, aside from the technical aspect of the foam damage, was the senior management wasn't listening to their technical advisors, and they didn't support them. And the organizational communication flow and structure was not there for the team to effectively communicate the needs and requirements to the management to make informed decisions.
Yep. Just by the way, I see Brett joined. Welcome, Brett.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for joining. Yeah, one of the things I pulled up my paper here, and one of the things right out of the gate that it talked about was they had this attitude of if you found something that you thought was wrong or could cause a problem, the mindset was you have to prove that it's a problem, which
is a problem.
Which is a problem in itself. It's completely backwards in the idea that, especially with, you would think that an organization like NASA should have this culture of safety is the most important part of everything they do. So if someone's bringing up something that they think is a problem, to dismiss them with, you have to prove to me that that's a problem, is totally backwards.
So I interpreted it, Brad, is that they did have a process in place and that safety was number one, but they just ignored it because of budget constraints, and they wanted to get everything up and running and hit 50 launches, and they had some targets and goals, and so they neglected to follow their processes.
It's like they were under a lot of political and economic pressures to get the benefits out of the program, and I think they were just kind of playing Russian roulette, got desensitized to the danger. Like, well, it's never hurt us before. It's not going to hurt us again, in the future.
Yeah. I'm curious. How do we take this and apply it to like our kind of jobs and the organizations we're in? Because your point there that they were kind of deadline driven. I mean, that's exactly my work, but we're not blowing up people. We're not blowing up space shuttles. I mean, if we make an error where I work, that means someone's dishwasher didn't get repaired. So, it's not the end of the world.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
No, go ahead. I'll say my comment.
I was going to say, I actually do work in the government. So the organizational structure and the issues that they talk about in NASA were very relatable for me because when you have a lot of bureaucracy in what you need to get done and what you need to accomplish, and when there's things on the line, if your technical people aren't being listened to by the management is not able to make informed decisions. And sometimes they start layering too many buffers, if you will, from the technical people to the decision makers, and things get watered down and things aren't addressed appropriately because those senior leaders are not engaging with their technical workforce because of all the layers and buffers that management puts in place. So that, they can go to other important meetings and things, but they kind of stop listening to that workforce, and they stop seeking out their opinion and their analysis. So the whole "we don't have a problem until you prove me" that we do probably came about because, a lot of people were crying wolf over every kind of possible. I mean, you had the rings, is it too much gas, not enough gas? And I think they do get overwhelmed with a lot of this is all a potential problem. So launching a spacecraft inherently has potential problems. So.
Yeah, when you're dealing with that much data input, how do you cut through the clutter and understand what's truly a problem versus just somebody crying wolf? But one of the things I thought was an issue was the bureaucracy around requesting outside agency assistance in getting the imagery. That one thing could have at least given them an idea of what the extent of the damage. They come up with some alternatives for a different way to approach the landing or something that could have been done. Plus, the thing that really bothered me was, well, if it's really damaged, there's nothing we can do about it. They're dead.
Let it ride.
That was pretty bad.
And it talks in the agenda here about 3 different biases that were in play, and I'll read them, and then we can talk about the different ones that are examples of what existed. But it talks about a cognitive bias, which is systematic errors in judgment, a confirmation bias, which is our tendency to look for information that confirms our existing views. And this one was the most easily relatable for me, was the sunk cost bias, which that's the one where it's driven by, budget and deadlines and expected revenue. That one, I mean, that's another one where I'm in that same boat where we're trying to launch a new product at my work, and there was an arbitrary date of April of next year. And as we're planning and building and running into all kinds of problems related to the size of our staff to be able to do it and everything, is everyone wants to easily explain everything away and say, well, we've already built the model that shows that we have to start having revenue in April, and within 3 years we have to be hitting 10 million in sales. And it doesn't matter all the problems we're showing, and you got to invest this much in to build the size of the teams. It's all they seem to care about is you got to be selling in April because I need 10 million 3 years down the road. So it's the same deal here. I mean, they were driven by, we expected, I think they said they were supposed to have a mission every 10 days, which I know they never came close to that.
Yeah, turnaround time.
So that was kind of part of the flaw in their strategic plan that was making it difficult for them to really slow things down and analyze what they never went back to analyze, what would be the risks associated with pushing of those deadlines and those things without analyzing and bringing up, those points of issues. It was just their execution of their strategic plan, really.
Not to deviate too much, but anyone else have a struggle with the way this particular lesson, or even how this course itself is structured? Kind of like we read this use case, and then like we're now learning about different cognitive type issues and team dynamic. It seems kind of backwards.
Yeah, this one totally seems backwards. Yep.
I mean, here's the things that you should be getting out of it. This is what these kind of things are. Look for instances of it. Just kind of a.
Well, I'll tell you the funny thing for me, and if the instructor, I'm sure the instructor watches these and they'll maybe chuckle at this or cringe at this, but on every paper I've turned in, I've gotten dinged for not having an outside reference, which tells me I should be, I guess, looking for something outside of the lesson to confirm what I'm writing, which I just go, I thought.
I've been getting too, and on this one I didn't. Right. Because all I did is I referenced, I had one quote and I referenced the documentation in this finding where there was a link to a NASA website where they pulled their report.
Right.
That's what I referenced. Done. And I didn't get dinged this time.
Yeah, I did the same thing last time. I just referenced something, but in this one, I actually referenced an article that was talking about when managers go deaf to their workforce and the organizational downfalls that can create. So I cited that because I felt it was relevant. So I kind of looked at that.
Yeah,
which is what led me to the understanding of what a strategic plan is, and also the flaws that having that launch schedule, having those hard dates, having what they've just overextended in their strategic plan, and that ultimately is what caused them to fail. So,
and they didn't have good systems for addressing
no.
the problems. One, they didn't understand the magnitude of the problem that they were getting into. The original design of the shuttle was changed, so that impacted their strategic plan, increased the complexity of the shuttle, increased the complexity of the retrofit, the turnaround time after each launch, but they didn't go in and reaccount for that
Right.
turnaround time. So now they're under pressure to get the shuttle turned around faster. Any problems became more of a problem related to turnaround time as opposed to shuttle safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I realize it's probably a very complex problem, but I remember watching the shuttle and the foam falling off, that kind of, and always wondering, that can't be good. Even as a teenager, thinking that can't be good. And then, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So some of these questions are a little repetitive here, but based on those various biases, like the next one here is what is shared cognitive framing? Frameworks, beliefs, and assumptions that help us simplify a complicated reality, and what evidence in this particular case is there of cognitive framing? Yeah, I think it actually brings up a point that you were just kind of making that, well, it says they viewed this as operational, meaning they were sort of making all their decisions based on the economics of how quickly they were trying to run shuttles, versus this was really, it calls it experimental, but for me it sounds more like a research type project. You're trying to prove out that you can do this stuff, so the bar I think would be much higher.
Yeah, they very quickly went into a kind of a corporate mindset of the bottom line, turn this around, kind of turning the shuttle and its crew into assets, like physical assets, like a dishwasher or a computer, as opposed to a very expensive piece of machinery and lives. And I know I'm kind of glossing over it. There's many that didn't take it that way, obviously, but just that cognitive framing you're talking about.
Yeah, I kind of, when I've read that, I was like, are they meaning kind of also like the managers hitting that yes man attitude, when they're just like, hey, yes we can, and no one ever stops, because it would be poor culture to stop and actually say, hey, you know what, we actually have issues. And I think, Brad, that's kind of what you're kind of talking about, because everyone's like, yes, let's set this time frame that we can do these things, but they're not going back and looking at, is someone scared to bring up that they're having all these issues, and is a manager just not wanting to look at it because they don't want to be, the Debbie Downer in the group to say, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that. And have the repercussions of the organization, would they lose their job if they didn't say yes? And is that the culture when the organization, the technical guy might not lose his job for bringing it up, but would the manager do it by listening to that and kind of pausing and stopping the projects?
Well, it even said there was the one guy who kept really pushing for, I don't know if it was the O-rings or the strikes or whatever that were a huge problem. And it said the culture of NASA was he could talk about that among his peers, but not above him. It was like wrong for him to bring that up above him, which again is completely wrong.
There was an escalation,
right.
A real good escalation process, and a lot of groupthink. And like, well, we all think the same way and not challenging. You guys watched the movie? Brad Pitt movie about zombies.
I can't think of it either.
You know the one I'm talking about?
World War Z, I think.
Yeah, World War Z.
Okay.
So he's in Israel, right? In Israel and Jerusalem, they built this wall and they're kind of safe. And the guy's saying, well, we heard this one thing, and they had a group of 10, and it was that guy's job, one guy's job, to, regardless of how crazy it sounded, was to act as if it was true. And that was their safety relief valve. And I kept kind of thinking about that in this case, that there wasn't really a sense of, like a safety valve that could raise its hand and everything stopped and took, and there were no repercussions. Something in it.
Mm-hmm.
Just interesting how it all worked.
Yeah, so we'll go on to the next question here, and I'll try to keep moving because, to be honest with you, the list is long on this one. We're still in the second group here. It says, when did the problems with Columbia begin? And I'll take a crack at that first, because I kind of read that to be, if the whole first part of what we were reading was about the early years of NASA and some of the problems they encountered then. So you could make the case that, they were already encountering issues. They weren't really dealing with those, although they did come up with that concept of, I think they called them tiger teams,
Mm-hmm.
that were specific to how to solve problems. But even that struck me as being very reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, waiting to ensure that they've thought of everything before they actually launch something that, they would have to throw this tiger team at to fix something that's potentially going to cause another catastrophe. So you could make the case that it started even before that the Columbia program or the shuttle program was in place. They had problems that they hadn't solved or handled properly before they even got to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a problem. And then again, they also made the case, like with those tiger teams, as they were researching some of the issues with the Columbia space shells, where like the debris strikes or the O-rings. They even said they weren't putting the same level of teams on those tiger type teams. So, I mean, there's numerous things you could point to of when the problem started. But what does everybody think about that?
I agree.
I like it. I think the problem started in 1986 when they lost the first 7 individuals because the O-rings failed. Because outside sources told them that it was too cold to launch, but no one listened to them. And I think they had the attitude then that they were on a higher level than the outside sources and the engineers that they sourced from different companies. And as different companies taught them or told them what to do, they just didn't listen to them. They seemed to ignore them, and I think that's when the main problem was. I think that's when it started.
Yep. Again, I'm going to skip down because some of these questions seem completely, because it talks about what's the root situation here and when did problems start with the Columbia mission. I'm going to jump down to just what do we think is, or how would we characterize the culture at NASA? And I'll wait to give my thoughts on this one.
Very structured and rigid, and quite political, I think.
I agree. I encounter this stuff every day because I work for a government organization, and it's bureaucracy, it's political, it's a culture difference of rank structure, ineffective communication, things like that the government is just plagued with as a whole. It's a typical clunky government culture.
I just think a lot of people, I defined it as lackadaisical. I just thought a lot of people just didn't seem to think it was their problem. It was someone else's problem. And when they were called upon to assist, whether it was with the imagery or whatever it was, they just seemed to put it away and swept it under the rug and just continued on with what they were doing.
Yeah.
I got quite angry about it, honestly.
But you take a step back, think about the complexity of the environment that they're dealing with. There were probably a lot of other problems that came up. They're trying to determine, is this a problem that's going to impact the integrity of the shuttle? And they're already clamoring for other noise or against other noise. And then the fact that it's never been a problem before, why would it be a problem now? Right? As opposed to every occurrence is a individual and unique situation that needs complete due diligence, as if it's the first time it's occurred.
Yeah, but I think the original foam originally when they would have a phone break, they would somewhat shut it down and say we need to figure out what the problem was, and then they changed the definition of a phone break to where they allowed it, and I thought that's where they knew there was a problem, and rather than, it's kind of like, for example, I have a friend who's in the police force in the city of Eugene in Oregon, and the city of Portland has a hard time hiring policemen because of consumption of marijuana. So it used to be 10 years. If you consume marijuana in the last 10 years, they wouldn't hire them. And they couldn't get anyone on the police force, so then they changed it to 5 years. And now they're down to 3 years. So they knew they had a problem, but they just kept lowering their standards to keep the mission going.
We have that same issue in the government. It's hard to recruit people because of all the legalized marijuana. It's hard to recruit people because of the government cultures. People don't want to work in a bureaucratic environment where their expertise is not listened to, it's not accounted for, and like you said, kind of the lackadaisical exception to everything. So it's hard for, like, I work in the IT tech industry for the government, and we can't retain qualified people because they don't want to work for the government agencies. Like, they might have that moment of, yeah, I want to work for, the government, and then as soon as the corporate, A, they pay better, and B, their cultures are just better. They treat their people better. You can actually get pens, you need a pen, it comes the next day, where it takes me like, almost a month and a half to get a box of pens in our office. So
Amazon will overnight them.
right. Or you could just
walk over to a cabinet and grab one.
Walk down to CVS and pick up a pack, But no, we've got to use this process, this rigid process, to solve even the smallest bit of a issue of, yeah, we need pens for our workforce, and that doesn't even touch or scratch on the surface of intergovernment, requests, and like how they were saying they needed to go outside, and just the levels of approval that it looked like NASA had to go through to even get that approval to go to another agency and ask for that support. And that's kind of even what we've seen with like 9/11 and all these things that we've kind of done is, oh, well, so-and-so had the information, they just didn't share it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this strange government culture, and it is getting difficult to recruit and retain. And also, the government's looking a lot at how they deal in management and listen to their people. And they're trying to change that culture. There's big initiatives where I work where they're trying to become a little bit more corporate and be able to move fluidly to solve problems, but they're just not there yet.
All right, so I'm going to combine two of these here because it talks about who are the important contributors to the mission's failure and who is accountable and why. And I'll tackle the accountable one first, because to me, it goes back to this is kind of the cultural thing too. They haven't given like clear guidelines as to one, what are their, I'm trying to think of the right word that we use, sort of, what are your founding principles? What are the principles you run your business on? And because again, safety, if they did think it was important, or they were trying to say it was important, it was clear in their processes and lines of communication that it wasn't, and that you would push everything down as it related to safety. So to me, that's a failure of their top leadership to have not clearly communicated those guidelines and directions as to what you do as issues come up. So that's where any accountability starts. It starts at the top because you haven't put the framework in place so that people understand how they deal with issues. What do you think?
I think that's a good point. Ultimately, it's the leadership who created a culture where, or tolerated a culture where risk wasn't really able to be called out, effectively managed.
Yep.
It's interesting because the team did do the work and they did call it out and they lined it out very clearly. I mean, when they said, this is a much larger piece of foam than we've ever seen, and we don't know exactly what it. I mean, they clearly called it out. They even had a good process to solve the problem, but they didn't have the management support to actually get the work done. So I would definitely put it on the management support.
So I would blame two individuals. One, the President of the United States, who created NASA, and for their desire to send people to space. And I don't know if that's the right person to blame. But there was an individual who shut down, I can't remember if it was emails. The one individual requested for outside source to see if they could get imagery, to see if they could get a clearer sight. And someone kind of nixed that and shut it down and sent an email out and said, we won't be seeking any more imagery for this. And then there was another group that typically, when there was an issue or when the shuttle was in space, they met every day. And for some reason during Columbia's mission, they changed that meeting to like the first day, the fifth day, the seventh day, the eighth day, and the ninth day. So I think those individuals who made those decisions to, like I've said before, to leave the process and to create a new one during the critical times when they knew there was a foam debris strike is I think is who's to blame.
I think you're onto something by saying the president, because during this time, NASA was under huge budget cuts and a lot of pressure to try and keep the program open and relevant. And I think that pressure also contributed to the risk taking that the senior leaders were trying to accomplish. So I kind of feel like budget cuts, do more with less.
The political pressure
will ultimately always, result in tragedy. So,
Well, think too about it. There's all of that as it relates to budget cuts and everything, but kind of the ego of we were really doing it. It was started based on the idea that we were competing with another country. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Was it another country or was it a group of countries?
Well, I mean, they specifically mentioned Russia launching Sputnik.
Yeah. Russia was the only one at the time.
It seems like there was another. Yep.
But Japan and a few other countries were starting to contribute to the International Space Station. So I think you're right in that there was pressure for the United States to keep up its end of the deal in getting the space station set up, configured, manned, and all of that. So there's there's a lot of pressure on them all over the place.
And weren't we also kind of fighting a war during that time frame too? Was it like kind of the Kuwait issue? I can't remember.
We were in basically, or Desert Storm had just wound down, but we still had, an occupying presence or something over there.
Yep.
That always results in big budget cuts.
Yep. All right. So next section is on group dynamics, and what do we think is the concept of team design? It actually goes to what I kind of talked about why I thought leadership is accountable, because it talks about good team design is based on creating structure, clear boundaries, compelling direction, the proper support systems in place, which again, to me, is all about leadership, creating the framework for a team to be able to succeed is what I meant there. Yeah.
As I was thinking about that, I recently had a boss leave. He retired. He was a very hard-nosed individual. It was just his management style, but he was a good guy overall at heart. But he was just didn't take anything off of anybody, and he had a reputation of a bit of a bully. But one of his key guiding principles was escalation is a good thing, and debate is necessary. And so he expected things to be escalated. He would get so upset if team members would sit and kind of try and churn through a problem and constantly being, dealing with roadblocks they couldn't get through. He's like, I can knock down any roadblock that exists in this company. Don't let it delay our project. And, escalate it to me if needed. Obviously, do what you can, but escalate, and then also debate and really debate things. And there were times when we got into really, really heated arguments, and then afterwards, and go and have lunch, and it was just debating about and bring passion to the discussion. And I think both of those things were kind of lacking. There wasn't a culture of escalation and taking it seriously. You couldn't really debate a problem and fight for it with passion without being personally dinged and nasty in there. So that goes to the boundaries of the team that was set up. Climate.
When I think of teams, I think teams require trust in the individuals who's next to you, in front of you, behind you, and around you. And I didn't sense that there was a lot of trust within the team at NASA, because they didn't seek their guidance, they didn't listen to their guidance, and it wasn't. I didn't think it was there.
So that's actually a perfect segue into the next bullet point, which talks about the concept of psychological safety, which we kind of talked about like 2 or 3 lessons ago.
I think it was like our first lesson, right?
Right. So we certainly talked about that at some point, but it has to do with the idea, again, of creating a culture where you're willing to take risks. You're not just going to get shot down. You're going to be listened to. Here it talks about, the culture and team unity, but to me that the psychological safety is all around. Do you feel comfortable knowing you can make suggestions, bring up issues, which we saw in the NASA case that you really weren't supposed to? Yeah. Anybody have any other thoughts on that one? Or I'll keep moving.
I think we got that one. I think we all agree there was definitely teaming and culture issues.
Big time.
Okay.
I certainly wouldn't volunteer to get on the next mission.
So we actually are getting close to wrapping up here again, based on a lot of this is duplication. But does anybody have any personal experiences as it would relate to this, or application of the principles, or any personal stories that kind of relate to some of this?
I don't have any.
I have one that kind of relates in terms of the escalation and cross-departmental operation and work. Several years ago, it's been 8, 9 years ago, I was working for our VP of Finance, and she and our CIO butted heads all the time. But at the lower levels, the team's got to work together. And I had a need that required the CIO to sign off on a request. She was at an offsite. I couldn't go through her. So I just reached out to him, very politely worded it. Hey, would you sign off on this technical request so we can get people access to these systems and move forward on work? Very, very, I think it was very professionally worded email. But anyway, she got back, and all heck broke loose. She was really upset. A couple days later, she requested me to fly from Phoenix to San Francisco to her corporate office because she had some new assignment she needed to talk to me about, or something, and I knew what was happening. Anyway, I got called into her office, and she said, if you ever go over my head, you will be out of here. Don't ever do that again. And she said, you did everything right. That was well worded. In any other organization, that would have been perfectly acceptable, but not here. I'm like, how was I supposed to know that? I know you two don't quite get along, but that level of dysfunction, are you kidding me? So after that, all right, fine. I'm not going to, just to say, discourage me from really trying to take action and do the work that I'm supposed to do. So yeah, that was a very frustrating time.
So something I kept thinking about as I read this, it's not necessarily a personal experience, but it's actually a training I went through as it relates to team building. And I thought I'd just quickly explain it because maybe it'll be useful to any of you on the call here. It talked about there's 4 stages to actually building a successful and team that's going to perform to a high level. And it's based on the idea that when we're kind of self-aware of a process and where we may be in that process, we have a better chance of getting through some more of those difficult stages faster because we understand that there may be difficulties along the way. But based on that, there was these 4 steps as it related to building teams, which said the first step, and there's nothing I'm going to share here to show you, obviously visually, but just kind of picture in your head. But the first stage was you're forming a team. And it basically shows a bunch of people coming together, they're all kind of facing different directions in the sense that they're not on the same page yet. They don't necessarily know what they're trying to accomplish. And then it talks about in that forming stage, that's where you're starting to do the things where it talks about team design, of making sure they all understand what their purpose is, the direction, or their clear, compelling directions, the boundaries they have in that, the structure of how you're putting them together, and the support system in place for them to be a successful team. And it says once you've started to do that and you continue to drive those principles into that team, they actually move to the next stage, which is called the storming phase. And the storming phase is where it actually gets worse before it gets better, because everyone's going to be trying to understand the boundaries and push the boundaries, and have their opinions on how they do things. And so it actually gets a little bit worse in stage 2. Then it moves to stage 3, which is, they call that the norming stage, which is everyone is now starting to point towards the same direction because you continue to push the vision and direction you want of that team, and everyone slowly starts to get on board and is moving in the right direction, which leads to the 4th one, which is performing. And now you have a team that, because you've driven a culture with them, they reach that 4th stage, which now they're a performing team. So, I mean, I'll give them to you one more time here. It was the 4 stages are: you're forming a team, then you have a team that's storming, then you have a team that's norming, and then you have a team that's performing. So that was one of the things I got from a training one time as it relates to team design and getting a team to top performance. Again, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I thought of when I thought of my own personal experience as it relates to team building.
Yeah, and
I like that.
Then, different events can cause those teams to revert back down one of those layers at times. What I've found.
Yep.
No, Brad, that was super helpful. I actually am in the process of building a new team. We have a new kind of strategic outlet, that a plan that our commanders have given us, and we're putting together our teams. But I just recently was hired, so I'm kind of the new guy, but the team really hasn't formed itself yet. So we spent pretty much all day today going over boundaries, roles, functions, who does what, how do we communicate, who makes the decisions, how do we communicate those decisions. So I guess we're in the building phase, and
you're in the forming phase.
and then I think we're going to hit that storming stage, because I could already feel the tension and the issues rising out of that, of certain people that just don't want that change, and they don't want other people to come in and mess with what they have already, on a very smaller level, have built. So I feel like we're going to hit that storm stage really soon.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about it is when people hear that, even like I've shared that with a team that I'm on, and everyone kind of goes, oh, so the fact that we're kind of butting heads right now is it's normal. It's actually natural.
Totally normal.
Yeah. And so it's okay, because it's just us working our way towards understanding of our goals and how we work together to get to the performing stage.
The hard thing is how do you retain people in that storm, so that you don't continuously have to go back to the forming stage? Because what we found is when people are starting to butt heads, they start looking for new jobs, and they don't want to work it out to get to the actual results. So we kind of have found a stall in that kind of circle of building and forming, keep circling back around, because people get tired of it.
So I have 2 classes where teamwork and communication are being taught. So I do sometimes confuse things. But this is the class where we're supposed to read the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah, I think we just started it, right?
Have you guys done that? I got a chance to. I actually got it on Audible in addition to the hard copy, but I listened to it over the last 3 or 4 days going to and from work. It's a really short book, but it's got some really good insights about how really good teams actually have those passionate debates, and do, even in that storming phase in a good team. And I'm kind of, the book doesn't say it. I'm applying what we've been talking about, but you're constantly, from an outside perspective, an outside observer would think that a team never got out of that storming phase, because they're constantly fighting and passionately fighting for what they believe and contributing to the process. But the difference is that once the group makes a decision, it's not even a consensus decision. They make a decision for the best of the best. What's the best decision for the company? Everybody gets behind it, regardless of what their original position was, because they were heard. They were able to express their position, argue for their position. That's 90% of what people want. They want to be heard, have their opinion expressed or understood, listened to, and debated. And then after that, they're okay if it, that's not the direction we go. At least I was heard. Now I can get in and support what the group wants to do. But I actually like the way that book is written. It was an easy book to consume.
Yep. All right. Does anyone have any last thoughts? We're almost at 9:45, so we put in a good amount of time here. If not, we'll wrap it up.
I don't have anything.
I'm good.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody. I'll post out the link.
Great group meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.